Hi, I'm Jonah, and this is a Learn to Play tutorial for Over the Rainbow. And this is a sweet melody that a lot of us grew up with from The Wizard of Oz, and it sounds beautiful in the native flute. Now, if you don't know this song, I'd suggest going on the web, doing a quick search for Over the Rainbow, and you'll be able to find different versions of it, and that way you can kind of get the general idea of what the melody sounds like, and it's helpful to have that in your head as you're learning to play the song. Now I'm going to be playing this on a flute in the key of B. This is in our high tone range. This is our key, our whitetail hawk in the key of B. But again, it sounds good on any of the flutes, just like most of the songs that we play on the native flute. On any key, a lot of them will sound really good. In this particular case, when you start getting into the bass flutes, a lot of the bass flutes won't play the notes over the octave, the high notes that are over the octave, as true as some of the mid-tone flutes and the high-tone flutes. So I'd suggest, if you're going to be really wanting to get those higher octave notes that this song uses to be in tune, I would suggest using a mid-tone or a high-tone flute to do that. But if you have a bass flute and you want to experiment, give it a go. Maybe you'll like the way it sounds, and that's what really counts. So I'll play through the song once. We'll go through an introduction of how to use the tutorial. Within that, there's if you want to skip that, I'll put in there what minute to skip forward to get right into the introduction, or right into the tutorial. Now, the easiest way that I find to learn songs is to work through them phrase by phrase. Now, phrases are like sentences. You put a bunch of sentences together to build a story. In the same way, you put a bunch of phrases together to build a song. Essentially, each time you pause to take a breath, you've completed a phrase. And because in the music we've added these breath marks, you can easily see that the phrases begin and end at each of these breath marks. I've also noted the number of the phrases using these numbers with lines through them. Phrase 1, 2, and so on. As I walk through each phrase, I'll note anything that's unusual or particularly challenging in that phrase, and then I'll show you how to play it, and I'll play it at a really slow tempo. And at that point, I'd suggest pausing the video and working on that phrase until you have the fingerings and the rhythm pretty well down at that slow tempo, and then move on to the next phrase. Once you move through the whole song, I suggest going back to the beginning of the song and working through each phrase again. And each time you do that, your hands will memorize the fingerings a little bit more, and you'll memorize the rhythms a little bit more, and the song will get easier to play, and you can start bringing it up to tempo. These are the notes that some of you may not have played before, so when you come to these notes in the song, have some patience with yourself. It may take a little time to learn the transitions from the note before it to this note and to the note after it. I'll also talk more about these transitions and notes as we come upon them in each phrase. This is the sheet music for Over the Rainbow. And I think of this song as being an intermediate level song, mostly because of the cross fingerings that are required for the song. The other thing is that a lot of the notes that it uses are over the octave of the normal octave of the native flute, some of the highest notes that it can play. And so if you haven't experimented with how to hit those notes, this will be a good song for learning some of that and for learning those cross fingerings, some more complex cross fingerings in order to play those notes over the octave. It'll really add a lot of notes to your everyday playing and some notes that are really cool to use. It also uses a half hole on the bottom note in order to reach that half step above the low note. And that also is a technique that will take some practice and is a good technique to start learning if you haven't played with that before. Now, the rhythm itself of this song is not terribly complex, and it's especially helpful that a lot of us know what it's supposed to sound like. That really helps when translating a written rhythm into a melody on an instrument. If you don't know what it sounds like, I really would recommend going to YouTube or some other online resource or general resource and listening to what it sounds like so you can get an idea of that. Now, one of the key things to notice on the sheet music is this symbol right here, which is a repeat symbol, and along with this number 1 and this number 2 here. And what this is telling us is that we're going to play through these phrases of the music, and on the first time through we're going to play this, what is underneath this number 1, then we're going to hit the 2 little dots, which is our repeat symbol. We're going to go back to the beginning, and then we're going to play through to this measure here, and at that point we're going to skip this number 1 and move to number 2 here and continue playing through to the end of the song. And this is a way of making sheet music more concise. When there's a theme that's going to repeat itself exactly, we can add in these repeat symbols along with these numbers and to keep the sheet music shorter and in essence actually easier to read. So this is the first phrase, but I'm showing it here as phrases 1 and 3, and that's because after the repeat symbol, when we come back to play it again, it becomes phrase 3. And again, what I think is the most complex thing of the whole song, and especially in this phrase, is the cross fingerings and popping the flute into the higher octave that are required to play this phrase. And this phrase, along with phrase 2, are the main theme of the song. And so they're going to come up again and again. And so you'll want to take time now to work through these cross fingerings to develop the dexterity to move through this sequence of notes smoothly, as well as get used to using a staccato or a harder type of tonguing to really pop the flute up into the higher octave to get those high notes. So when I talk about popping the flute into the higher octave, I'm talking about using your tonguing in a really staccato or a really stiff way. Ta, ta, you're really punctuating it. And what it does is it puts a little blast of air into the flute that pops it up into the higher octave. Another thing that you can do in order to get the flute to jump up to that higher octave is to use that popping of the tongue, of that staccato tonguing technique, mixed with a slide of the fingers. Rather than just opening your fingers straight up, a sliding of the fingers. And here's a visual example of what that looks like when we're going from this first note to this second note, where you're going from a relatively low note on the flute to one of the higher notes over the octave, one of the higher notes that the flute can play. Now this next series of notes going from here to here is going to take some time to teach your fingers not only the dexterity of the cross fingerings, but also just the pattern of notes that you're moving through from one to the next in order to be able to move through these notes smoothly and move up and down in above the high note, going above the octave and then back down to the normal octave range of the native flute. And give yourself some time with this, because it takes anyone and everyone some time to learn the dexterity of this combination of notes in order to move through it at tempo. To help out a little bit, I have created this graphic which splits the notes up into groups of 3. And in the beginning, what I would suggest is just getting your fingers to move through these sequence of notes, maybe not even playing them, but just teaching the dexterity of moving from one note to the next. Then start playing with them at a really slow tempo, or no tempo at all, and then start adding some tempo into it and start speeding that up as your fingers gain the dexterity, and then eventually putting them all together to play this series of notes. If you have the leather tie covering the 6th hole, you'll need to either remove the leather tie, or you can just, I often will just spin it out of the way. So again, from here to here, then we go down, up, and we go to here and here. Give yourself some patience with those. It took me a little while to get all those cross fingerings in that order. This is the second phrase, and in this phrase we're not going over the octave, so that makes it a little easier to learn. We do have some cross fingering going from this note to this note, and then going from this note to this note. Probably a more challenging part of this phrase is hitting this note here, this half hole, and you're literally covering half the bottom hole. And it'll take a little time to get your bottom finger to hit that hole halfway, just like it took a lot of us quite a bit of time to get it to actually cover the hole completely. This will take a little time to get it to cover only half the hole. After I play through this phrase slowly, I'll talk a little bit about how I hit that half hole and show you visually how I do it. Now when we get to the end of this phrase, we're going to play through the first ending, which is this one here, and then we'll hit this repeat symbol, and then we're going to go back to the beginning of the song in the next phrase, or phrase 3. So if you notice, when I'm going to hit that half hole, I hit it, I come down, and I hit it with the lower half of my finger, rather than maybe like the side or the upper half. But if one of those others works good for you and you get a note that sounds good, then that works. Now here we are back at the beginning of the song, which is now phrase 3. Now obviously it's exactly the same as phrase 1, so I'm not going to go through all the details of it. I will put up the graphic that will help with some of the transitions, the cross fingerings here. And I'll also play through the same exact video that I have for phrase 1 at the end of this as well in order to help you get the visual of what this phrase sounds like. Here we are at phrase 4, which is exactly the same as phrase 2 because of this repeating that we're doing. So in order to save time on the tutorial, I'm not going to go through all the details again here, but what I will go over is the ending here because this is a little different. So when we get to the end of this measure here, instead of going through the first ending, we're going to skip the first ending and go down here to the second ending. And the phrase actually ends at the beginning of the second ending on this dotted half note here. So we're going to play through all these measures here. When we get to the end of this measure, we're going to skip this measure here, and we're going to jump down to here to the second ending and finish the phrase with this dotted half note. Phrase 5 is a quick series of repeating notes in 2 different sections. So for me, instead of counting how many notes I'm playing, because otherwise I get lost in how many of these back and forths I'm going for, I sing the song in my head as I'm playing the melody. So it's, one day I'll wish upon a star and wake up where the clouds are far behind me. So that's the way that I do it. You can also just count the number of notes as you're playing them in order to make sure that you transition at the right time. If your eyes can visually move you through each note as you're playing it, that's really helpful. Sometimes my eyes get cross-eyed by the time I get here, and it's hard for me to keep focus on the individual ones that I'm on. Whatever technique that you find that can move you through these at tempo and also with the correct number of transitions back and forth in order to play through this sequence correctly. Now this first run of notes starts on this previous measure. It starts on the last offbeat of this measure here. So as you come out of phrase 4 and you end on this dotted half note, you take a breath and then you move into phrase 5. You have this last beat of that previous measure, 4 and that's where you start on that and right here. So if we were to count this, it would be 1, 2, 3, breath, 4, and then you're moving into this first section here. Now, if you know what this song sounds like, and it's really helpful because what we're really trying to do with the sheet music is take this song that we know and play it on the flute. And so we can use that in situations like this where you're starting on an offbeat, you're starting a new phrase on an offbeat, which is a little bit complex for the counting portion of it. And so instead of counting it out exactly, you end phrase 4, and when it feels like what the song would start again, you go ahead and move into phrase 5. Now the first run of notes, these here, are relatively easy to move through because you're just opening and closing one finger. But then in this run here, it's a series of cross fingerings. So you're going to need to teach your fingers this series of cross fingerings, which is just back and forth from the same 2 notes. So that's helpful. But you're going to be needing to do it relatively quickly in order to do it up to tempo. So Here's a graphic of those notes to give a little larger visual of it. And again, I would suggest working through it with just your fingers to start learning the dexterity, and then add your breath into it, and then start adding rhythm and bringing it up to tempo. Phrase 6 is very similar to phrase 5 in that it also is this run of notes, and it also starts on this offbeat of the previous measure here. Now, the first run of notes is the same as the first run of notes in phrase 5, but in the second run of notes, the cross fingering is a little bit trickier in that you're really lifting all your fingers and switching these two fingers for this one. So it's a quick switch back and forth between the two. And then when you get to this last note, and then you pop up to this high note again. So, and it's a quick going off of these eighth notes into this half note. So when you come off of this note here, you really need to make that transition with the fingers and give a nice strong staccato, hard tonguing in order to really pop the flute up and over the octave and into that high note. And again, I use the song as I'm moving through these series of notes in order to know when to transition from one cross fingering series to the next. I'm also visually reading the music going up and down with the notes, but sometimes my eyes can get cross-eyed and just lost in where I am in this up and down. So I use the song in my head. But you can also count them or just stick to the visual way of doing it in order to keep track of where you are in the music in this phrase. Phrase 7 takes us back to the theme of the song. It's an exact replica of phrase 1 and phrase 3. And so the theme of the song is really the heart of the beginning. Phrases 1 and 2 express the theme of the song, Somewhere Over the Rainbow. And then they're repeated multiple times throughout the song. And here, this is the last time, phrases 7 and 8. We go back to that. It's exact replica of phrases 1 and 2. And one of the things I really like about this part of the song is as you're coming off of phrases 5 and 6, where it's a little more upbeat, there's a lot of repetition of the notes, and you move out of this kind of faster part of the song, and then you move into that theme again. This last time you hit this theme, and you're coming off of these half notes, it really makes this last theme, this kind of into a crescendo of the song, and it has this kind of soft, epic, overarching feel. Phrase 8 is the second part of the theme of the song, and in this part of the song, it's also part of the crescendo of the song, because the theme of the song kind of crescendos right here. And I think it's good to think about the whole song altogether as a way of putting a different feel of in your playing into different parts of the song as you get to know the song more, and you're not just working on the technical parts of it. You can start working on the feel of the song. And in the beginning, we move through the theme a couple times as an introduction, and then we move through this section where it's kind of faster notes that are moving back and forth from each other, and it gives some variation and has kind of a faster, energetic feel to it. And then we move into this section, phrases 7 and 8, where it has this kind of epic feel. You're plateauing in the song, and then from here we move into the end of the song, and it has kind of a finality to it. So it's helpful when you are playing a song on the flute to put that feeling into it, to know the song in such a way that you can really add emotion to the different parts of the song as you move through them. Now this phrase has a cross fingering that goes from here to here and here to here. And then it also has this half hole right here, which I think by now your finger is getting used to hitting in whichever way that you find the easiest to make that happen. Phrase 9 is an exact replica of phrase 5, and so the sequence of notes is exactly the same. So you've seen this before, so I'm not going to go over it in too much detail here. The one thing that is happening at this part of the song is it's starting to end. So you can start putting that the feeling of the ending of the song into into this phrase. And as you play the song more and more, that will make more and more sense as you aren't concentrating so much on the technical part of the song, and you can concentrate more on the general feel of the song. And here we are at the last phrase of the song, phrase 10. And it's very similar to phrase 6. This first run of notes is exactly the same. We start on the offbeat here, and we move through these 9 eighth notes. But then the second run of notes is shorter. Instead of being 8 eighth notes, it's just 4 eighth notes. And then we move into two half notes. And what that starts to do is end the song. These half notes, we're starting to hold notes longer, but we're holding the same notes. So we're starting to draw it all out. So then we have the half notes, and then we're moving up in pitch to end the song on this high note.